Thank you. Welcome to the Growth and Infrastructure Waste Committee, number 2020-04 for the 12th of November 2020, and I know that's 9 o'clock on the dot. We'll move straight to council attendance. I can see that we have full attendance. Good morning to you all.
Morning.
And good morning. Good morning. And we have 0 apologies. I'll ask for anyone to have any declarations of interest on any matters in the agenda. There are no declarations, so we'll move straight on to item number 1, which is confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of October 2020. May I have someone move those, please?
I'll move to accept those, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fechner. And Councillor Ireland will second them. Thank you. Open up for any discussion. There being no discussion, I'll then move that these minutes are approved. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous. We'll move on to item 2. I do note that items 2, 3, 4 and 5 are all priority list of projects. So before we go into question the officer, may I have someone to move item number 2?
I'll move it, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ireland. Seconded by Councillor Fechner. Thank you. May I ask the relevant council officer to come to the lectern, please? Everyone state your name and...
Tony DeLeo, Manager, Infrastructure Strategy. Good morning, Committee.
Thank you. Mr DeLeo, before we go on, I see items 2 through to 5 are basically a priority list of projects. Do you mind just, in 60 seconds, telling us what the purpose of this is?
Yes, so this is a report in a series of reports, some of which have come to committee previously, in the previous committee meetings. Essentially, they are priority list of projects that align to sub-programs of work within the capital works portfolio, and there are methodologies that we use to prioritise projects within each of those sub-programs of work. These are being put forward to committee for consideration, and the recommendations of all the reports are for the priority list of projects as submitted to be considered when the capital works program is developed for future financial years. Okay.
I'll open up to questions on the floor.
Through the Chair. So some of the projects, if councillors are aware that either the club itself wants to put money towards a clubhouse or a developer wants to do it, if there is money to go towards it, will that move that project further up the list?
I guess with the ones that the developers provide contributions for, that's related to the developer-funded parks, which is not this item, it's a future one. With regards to the local and strategic parks sub-programs of work, if there are clubs that wish to contribute, then certainly that should be considered as part of the considerations during budget deliberations. What we've done here is assess them as they are in terms of their current priority.
Okay, thank you.
You're answering questions about 2, 3 and 4, is that right?
This doesn't ask
2,
for
3 and 4?
item 2, I think, if we could stick to.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Mr DeLeo, I'm not sure if you probably can answer this on the floor. I absolutely respect we may need to go away and have a discussion, but I do note throughout the programs with the prioritisation, there seems to be a lack of activity, for want of a better word, across some of the suburbs within Division 3, including Collingwood Park, Riverview and Danbar. Just wondering, they're noticeable gaps, I guess, to me within my division. I understand with the methodology process that others may appear above or prioritise, but I just there's a distinct omission there. So,
Councillor Doyle, it's probably something I'd need to take on notice.
Yes,
I can't offer an explanation for that at this minute, but it's something that we can have a look at and provide some comment on.
that would be great. Thank you.
I guess, Mr DeLeo, if these 4 priority lists are approved, the next step is that these will be considered by us during budget deliberations. Is that correct? Where they can be adjusted.
Obviously, any budget is for council to debate, discuss and determine.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor
Just one
Fittner.
more question through the chair. Mr Dilio, I understand there's just 19 priority listings here, and they are all of the projects that have been that have had the methodology applied to them, and there are no others below the 19 that are currently listed here.
There may be others that haven't been assessed yet that may have come to us. Certainly, as any projects come to us, and we welcome requests and projects to be submitted at any time, they will be assessed against the criteria and then prioritised. So we would welcome suggestions for anything that people feel are missing from this list of projects.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Thanks, Mr Dilio. I just note the recommendation is asking us that the prioritised list of ancillary sport and recreation infrastructure projects, as a detailed attachment 3 of the report by the team lead, be considered when developing council's next capital works portfolio. And I think that's a reasonable request to make sure that we consider these when we're doing that, and obviously looking forward to when we also get the feedback from the service centre as well, from people who've raised suggestions and things like that through the service centre, and to help us when we're doing our budget deliberations at the moment. Would anyone like to raise any issues or discuss anything? No? Okay. I'll then put item number 2 to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to item 3, which is very similar, except we're looking at the local parks and sports program, priority list of project, that this prioritised list of ancillary sport and rec projects be considered when council's developing this capital works portfolio. May I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. Seconder, Councillor Kunzelman, thank you very much. Would we like to ask the relevant council officer to this one? I'll open up for discussion. No? Okay, in that case I'll put it to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. I see it's unanimous. Thank you. We'll move on to item 4, which is again is a priority list of projects for us to consider, the developer-funded park sub-program, for us to consider council's next capital works portfolio. So item 4, do I have someone who will move that? Thank you, Councillor Kunzelman. A seconder. Thank you, Councillor Fichtner. Would we like to ask the relevant council officer to that discussion?
I had one question.
Yes, Councillor. May I ask for the relevant council officer? I think you've got 2 questions lined up. Councillor Kunzelman?
Thank you, Mr Villiers. I just wondered if you had an example of a national level significance project. I didn't quite understand what that might have been. It's on page 53.
I think section F.
Sorry, I don't have the page number in front of me. Is that within the report, Councillor?
Yes, it is. It's under the heading of commemorative heritage value weighting.
It's item 4, attachment 2, under
Sorry,
F,
yes, thank you.
or page 53.
I don't can't give you an example off the top of my head. I'm sorry. It's certainly something I can ask the officers, the open space officers within my team, to provide that information, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Johnick.
Mr. Galeno, just in relation to the priority number 18 for the shade sails on the Rebel Domain Lagoon, I'm just wondering There's two questions really under two categories. Under the protection and safety category, there's 0 listed as the ranking. But is there any legislative requirements that we have to protect the community from UV rays? Is that a safety?
I'm not sure if there is a legislative requirement there. Again, I can check that.
Okay. I have read some recommendations that there should be at least a percentage of constructed sail or natural shade over swimming pools in local government areas. So I just kind of queried why that would have ranked to 0 and why it wouldn't have been higher.
Yep, you may be correct there.
And also the growth demand, because it's suggested that it's a level 6, which is investment is required in the next 5 years, as opposed to a level 8, which is existing infrastructure is meeting current demand, but there's nil capacity for growth. I don't know if you've been there in summer or not, but I don't think there's much room for anyone else to be in that lagoon at that time. So I'm just wondering if there's any work papers behind the rankings that would help us better understand how they're measured.
Councillor Johnnick, that is something that we can, I think that's a legitimate sort of comment, and it's something we can go back and check in terms of the scoring for that particular item.
Thanks, Mr. Gillio.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of Mr. Gillio? No? Thank you, Mr. Gillio. I'll now open it up for discussion. Councillor Johnnick, what page was that on?
Pardon?
What page was that on, the shade?
Oh, I just did some research, so I can show you that later if you like.
Thank you. I'll open up for discussion. There being no discussion for item 4, I'll then move for this to be accepted. Those in favour, please raise your hand. I see that's unanimous. Thank you. We're on to item 5, which is the priority list of projects for the Strategic Road Sub-Program for us to consider during the capital works discussions. May I please have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. May I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Milligan. Do we wish to ask for the relevant council officer? No? Then I'll open the matter up for discussion. There being no discussion, I'll then move on to a vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That's unanimous. Thank you. We'll move on to item 6, which is the Whitwood Road North Capital Works 2021-2022 and 2022-2023. And the recommendation is that the proposed regrading and final capping of the Whitwood Road North closed landfill, as detailed in the report by the planning officer, to an estimated cost of 6.5 million to 7.3 million, be considered when developing the council's capital works portfolio of the next 2 financial years. May I have a mover for that particular? Thank you, Councillor John. And a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Excuse me, who was the mover?
Councillor John. Will we ask may I ask for the relevant council officer to come forward, please? Please state your name and position. Yeah.
Good morning, Kay Kavanagh, Manager, Environment Sustainability.
Thank you. I'll open the floor up to questions. Councillor Joy?
Good morning. I'm just trying to understand what the original cost estimate was for the initial photocap design. Do we have any costings originally?
In the original design from 2015,
16, yeah.
I would have to get that for you. I haven't got it here within the report. There is a list of expenditure to date
Yep.
that Council has done as far as the soil materials that have been taken to site. But as far as overall costing for that design, I'd have to bring that back.
Okay. And so you don't have like a cost analysis to compare with the original one to the geosynthesis?
Not with me, no,
Okay.
sorry.
If the updated capping design is adopted, what is the likelihood of a solar farm being on site? Is it feasible? Have we done a feasibility?
So the capping design allows for that as a potential future use.
Yes.
So we haven't done a feasibility as if we were to put that on there. This
Okay.
is more just about making sure that we provide a capping that allows for that infrastructure in the future,
Okay.
should that be
But
something
we,
we
we're
look
not,
to do.
we're not sure whether we can have that infrastructure on that site.
With this particular capping design, that would allow for that type of infrastructure, yeah.
I say all this as there's significant funds that have already been spent on the site, which is like $3 million, to put towards sorry for my pronunciation, an evapotranspiration cap,
Yes. Yep.
which in itself is environmentally sound. So I'm just wondering why we've kind of changed our minds halfway through when there's that significant spend already of $3 million.
Yeah, and that might be answered if I can bring back that cost comparison. To date, the material that's been used, though, hasn't allowed for that cover, which is needed for evapotranspiration. So the soils that have been bought on site haven't, the vegetation hasn't taken, so therefore that capping design isn't as effective as it would like it to be, and therefore the clay capping is the proposed
Okay.
solution to give us a lot longer term solution for that site.
Excuse my ignorance with all of this, but I did read that the capping that was put on was a temporary measure until another design was getting initiated. So I'm just wondering why.
That's more recently, as far because that capping wasn't completed and the materials weren't effective. Interim measures have been done over the last couple of years just to ensure that we are compliant and to deal with the erosion issue. So the sediment basin, collecting that sediment and correcting the erosion on site.
Okay.
Councillor Councillor?
So my question follows, does this give us a guarantee that we won't be revisiting this within a reasonable time, or what, do we know?
Certainly the idea is that this gives us a long-term solution and we wouldn't need to be going back on site to redo this. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor
I
Fickner?
guess through the mayor, is there, so this solution with the clay, that specifically sets us up to put solar on it in the future, and I think what Councillor Jonick, she kind of raised this point that possibly is there a cheaper alternative if that's no longer considered a future use for the site, if it's not viable, if there's, you know, within the next 50 years, if council doesn't budget to put a solar farm there, is there a more cost-effective
Right.
solution
More
for
as that
this
fit for
this
purpose
problem?
solution.
Yeah.
Can I come back with that then, just to sort of compare that?
Thank you.
My question, Ms Kavanagh, is why is this council's responsibility? If other people have done work in there, why is council having to pay for it? Why have we paid for it?
So this is actually a council facility, owned facility, so it is still rests with council as being responsible for the capping and management of that site.
And I guess you go into a bit of the report, but what happens if we decide not to do it?
If we don't, then we are at risk of not being compliant under the legislation in regards to landfill or closed landfill site management.
So council has operated this as a landfill,
Previously, yeah,
Previously?
up until 2012.
2012.
Yeah.
And was this something that the previous council should have done to address this, or was it not known back then?
It was being addressed through that previous capping design and bringing soils onto site. So they were addressing it from that. It's just that that design wasn't as effective due to principally the topography of the site and the materials that were brought on site, heavy erosion, which then potentially allows for water to infiltrate into the waste materials underneath, and that can lead to future risk around leachate. So by having a clay capping, we're ensuring that we're not getting that water infiltration into the site and managing that more effectively.
So we're devil's advocate. How do we know that this will work? Because I'm sure in previous years, but 8 years ago when they put the other capping on, that they thought that would work. So how do we know this will work?
Yeah, we've engaged an external consultant, DHD, who are very well experienced to provide us with that advice. And this is a tried and tested solution on other closed landfills. So we would take it that we've been given sound advice on that.
Will it come with a warranty? So let's just say in 8 years' time we find out that it hasn't worked. Does that mean that company will pay for it to be rectified, or what's the
I would imagine
process?
we would do that through the contract of whoever we would engage to do the capping. I'm not sure how that.
Might ask the
Yeah.
CEO.
Can I just clarify that? We would specify the design, it's not a proprietary product. We ultimately, any construction project has risk, but if it's designed to appropriate engineering standards, there should be little to no risk of failure as long as it is constructed to the standard that is specified. So it's like building a
Councillor Dawn.
Through the Mayor, CEO, so given that it has been drafted and designed by an external consultant, being GHD, and an engineer, and given that we will obviously give it to a contractor to perform the works, who will then monitor to ensure that the contractor is meeting the standards within the design? I imagine that's a capability we probably don't have here in council.
Two things. We have our own in-house supervision, but we may choose to engage a third party to manage and supervise that, because it is complex stuff and it's stuff we don't do very
Yes.
often. And I guess the underlying issue with this just shows the risks and challenges more broadly about closed landfills. Now, as I understand it, this landfill wasn't lined originally, is that correct?
Indications that it wasn't, yes.
So a modern landfill has a clay and often a synthetic layer lining as well. So most of the landfills that have been established, private landfills that have been established recently, have been built to higher standards than we operated our landfill at. But we operated our landfill historically to the standards that were appropriate at the time. But they do present challenges now. The most important thing, particularly given it hasn't been lined, is to keep water out. Because if you get water into a landfill, that then produces leachate, which is colloquially described by somebody as garbage juice, which can then produce significant off-site environmental effects to both groundwater and to the surrounding environment. So it is quite a serious issue. And something that we are going to have to address. This is solutions being proposed. We'll pressure test this before we go, ultimately and spend that money. But clearly, a situation where there's a reasonably recently closed landfill and reasonably large that's allowing water to get in is not acceptable to ourselves, our local community, or the government.
Absolutely, thank you for that explanation, CEO. And I guess standards and best practice do change and update over time, and it's critical, council, as much as it's going to cost a significant amount of money, that we apply those very high standards, because we, going forward, will be seeking to apply those standards to the operators of these landfill sites. So we need to lead that best practice.
So will the, considering that wasn't lined properly, is the old landfill going to be dug up, a new lining put up, or are we just putting lining over what's there?
That's cost prohibitive.
Yeah. It's a lot of money, that's what I was asking.
Yeah, well, it would be a lot more money to excavate it and reline it and re-emplace it.
Okay. Have we done a risk assessment on what's there currently?
I'm not sure.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Ms. Gavin, has there been a risk? Are there toxins in there now that are leaching into?
I'd have to have a look what monitoring has been done, just to sort of see if we've got any testing on that. It was certainly putrescible waste was one of the fill that went into that landfill, as well as construction waste and other waste as well. So I wouldn't have that on me at the moment, but I can bring that back if need be.
Okay.
Just one more question.
Yes, Councillor Johnny.
Sorry. Was in my minimal reading that I've done of landfill caps, I read that the evapotranspiration cap that we initially were looking at putting on was quite sound, and it led to like high vegetation being able to grow on that site. Was that plan finalised before the erosion occurred? Like, was the actual cap complete?
It wasn't completed to the full depth of what was in the original design, so it
Okay.
still required
So
further
it
materials.
failed whilst it was getting delivered? Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Cameron. I now open this up for discussion amongst the councillors. Yes, Councillor Fick.
I think it's important to understand the recommendation and the motion put forward by by Councillor Johnnick and Councillor Doyle. It still leaves it quite open-ended for us to have discussions. So, you know, it must be noted for the ratepayer that we haven't committed to spending $6.5 million, but there is the potential there if we want to be seen as a good environmental citizen. But we'll continue to ask questions and gain better clarity, you know, as we get more information during the budget discussions as well.
Well said, Councillor Fickner. Any other discussion? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you. We go to item 7, which is a notice of motion from Councillor Ireland on the load limits placed on heavy traffic bridges. And that motion is that when a load limit is placed on a heavy traffic bridge and where no practical diversion is possible, that council immediately begin the process of costing a suitable replacement bridge or structure as a shovel-ready plan to be prepared for any future funding from state or federal governments. The M. Curl Bridge at Calvert is an example.
Through the Mayor, can I please make an alteration? It's the Tom Curl Bridge,
Thank
please.
you. Thank you. So the Tom Curley Bridge at Calvert is an example. Well, I assume that you're moving that, Councillor Ireland?
Yes, please. I would. I'd like that to be considered
Yes.
for any other bridges. We seem to put the signs up for quite.
I'll wait
some
for it to
time.
be seconded and then it's
Okay.
seconded by anyone? The Deputy Mayor? I'll open up for discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. We seem to put the signs up and say 15 tonnes load limit, but nobody ever watches what the sort of traffic that's going over it. The locals have said that there's quite heavy traffic. There's a heavy movement business out there that's taken a 40-tonne loader across it. I know that it's if they close it all together, it's a long way around for all of the people to have to go to get back into Rosewood. But I would ask that we have a program that when we close it, we've also got a shovel-ready project to replace it
Yep.
if funding becomes available in the following year or something like that. Thank you.
Definitely. I guess I'll ask the CEO, is there already, what is the program in place in council for these type of bridges where there isn't, especially in the more rural areas, where there are not a lot of options?
Mr Dill might be able to provide a more comprehensive answer than
Thank you, Mr. Dill.
myself.
I just, thank you, Mr. Dill. I just would like to know how you monitor the weight of traffic going over the bridge. You put up the flashing sign, but in this particular instance, if they have to go all the way up and around through Mount Morton, come back in, it's a very long way for them for businesses. And how long would that sign stay up before we're actually going to replace the bridge?
Good morning, councillors and Mayor. Councillor Ireland, we don't constantly monitor a bridge site if we reduce the load limit. We will do periodic inspections. It is difficult to control load limits and also potentially speed limits that we place on our older structures. Hence the reason why we move from speed limits down to load limits, and then we progress to replacing a structure. Can I respond to provide some comment for you in relation to the motion and some background? So in terms of an asset management process, the bridge structures are captured in our asset management system, and we undertake various levels of inspections. So level 1 through to 3. The highest level of inspection will be a structural integrity inspection by a qualified structural engineer. and they ascertain what capacity the bridge is safe for, and hence will, pending that report, will apply a load limit. When that occurs, we then plan for the design of a replacement structure. It becomes subject to a budgetary discussion as to whether that funding is allocated to undertake the design as part of a capital works program, and which has recently occurred with the 4 timber bridges that we have in the local government area. 2 are currently being 2 are planned for replacement in the next year to 2 years, and the others are undergoing design works.
So just through the me, so the ones that we are going to replace, we obviously know that the load limit isn't suitable for those bridges, or the load limits that's currently on the bridges you're going to replace are still okay?
It varies, Councillor. So it is either the load limit is acceptable, however, we are of the belief that the community isn't complying with the load limits and therefore presents a risk, or it's deteriorating at a rate that will fall below the load limit, and we need to be proactive in replacing it.
Okay, so just so I'm clear on what you said, you've put the sign, the flashing sign up to say 15 tonne, so you've already started a design to replace it, is that correct?
Not necessarily design, but we are planning to undertake design, and it will be included as part of the budget for forward design.
Oh, so only the budget, the next budget, if it gets up in the next budget, it'll only be for design. So that bridge is going to stay at 15 tonne, say, for 3 years.
That's the standard process, Councillor. However, if it presents a risk of deterioration prior to our 3-year delivery phase cycle, it would be proposed to accelerate that delivery.
Okay, so we don't have any, we've got no shovel-ready projects really. The ones you're going to replace are in the budget, but when it comes to the bridges, we've got no shovel-ready projects that we could apply if funding became available next year. We don't have any shovel-ready project bridges that we could apply to have replaced?
It depends on what is considered shovel-ready. So if we were seeking funding grants, and the requirement was you could submit a project that could be undertaken as a design and construct project, then it might be shovel-ready. But in terms of practical shovel-ready definitions, that is something that has a design issued for construction. So it's a design that we could issue to tender to get it priced, and for a contractor to deliver that.
Okay, so the bridges that we're going to replace would be eligible to be submitted. Is that what I'm understanding?
It depends on what the criteria is for the funding, and what they require and the timeframes they require delivery.
Okay.
So it's a case-by-case basis, Councillor.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr Dill, if this was approved, which is the council a resolution saying that when a load limit is reached, that we are now asking council to begin the process of costing a suitable replacement, what would be the impact if this motion was approved?
It's no problem at all, Mayor.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Mr Dill? Thank you, Mr Dill. I'll open this up for discussion. So, Councillor,
I think
if you'd like to. You wish to speak to it?
Well, thank you for your comments to help me to understand how it all comes together. I'm very grateful that they are replacing bridges out there, because obviously the population is starting to go that way if they want larger lots. And there's still a lot of cattle trains and heavy trucks that are at the houses. They've moved out there so that their trucking businesses are out of the city. But I don't want the businesses to be held back because we can't keep our bridges up to the standard for them to use.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Councillor Fickner?
Through you, Mayor, I just want to thank Councillor Ireland for her foresight in proposing this motion. I know that at its very core behind it is the want for more investment in our region and for us to be ready to access grants from other levels of government. And I understand that that was the intention of this, that if there's money available to help our communities, regional communities with their bridges and connecting communities, that was the express intention of this, to make sure that we're ready to apply for those grants and make sure that our road infrastructure, our transport infrastructure is ready for the growth. So thank you, Councillor
Councillor
Ireland.
Well, thank you for comments.
Thank you. I think Councillor Tully would like to make a few
Yeah,
comments.
thank you, Mayor. I'm supportive of the motion, but could I suggest an amendment? It's the use of the word diversion, which suggests that might be of a temporary nature, whereas, my experience of these load limits can go on for even decades. Can I suggest that instead of the word diversion, that it read no practical alternative route? The alternative route in substitution for the word diversion, and I think that would make it clear that would.
That's what it's intended to be.
Yeah.
I think that's what's intended.
So no
No
practical,
alternative route to
no
delete
alternative
the,
or no practical alternative?
no practical alternative. Well, it could be alternative, but it might be extra 200
Alternative route.
kilometres.
So we're replacing the word diversion with alternative route?
Yes.
I like the word practical because there is an alternative, but they'll
Practical's
have
already-
to
Yeah, that's
We'll
the
leave
word.
practical in there.
That's there.
We'll just remove the word diversion and replace it with alternate route.
Alternative, not alternate.
Yeah. Alternative.
Alternative?
Alternative, yeah.
And
No, alternative.
And I'll just get that up there, so I'll just check with Councillor Ireland, is that amendment acceptable to you?
Yes, thank you. I thank everyone for their comments, that's fine.
Deputy Mayor, is that amendment acceptable to you?
Confirmed.
Okay, thank you very much. So the new motion is, I'll just wait for Mr. Crits to put it up. And maybe take out the word is as well. Yeah, that is possible. Yep, that's correct. Thank you. I'll keep it open for any other discussion points. No? Thank you very much. We'll then put this to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. We now move on to item 8, which is the plant hire wet services. We have 3 recommendations, which I'm proposing that we look at all together because they all interlink. Looking at a preferred supplier arrangement for the supply of plant hire, wet hire services, and that council enter into a period of a contract for 2 years with the option to extend by 3 further 1-year periods. And then recommended C is that the CEO be authorised to negotiate this contract, which we're looking at around $11.5 million contract. So may I have a mover, please? Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And a seconder, Councillor Councilman. Thank you very much. May I ask for the relevant council officer to come forward, please?
Mr. Richard White, Manager of Procurement.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. White? Mike?
We'll note we do probably need to amend the recommendations in line with how we've been treating them previously, and apologise for that.
Yes.
We don't know the value of, we don't note the value of, or proposed value of the contract in the recommendation.
Yes.
Which has been our
I-
practice.
I do note that it is in the executive summary, Mr. White, so it's on the, I think it's I'm comfortable with that. I guess my initial question, Mr. White, is how much of this business is going to local Ipswich businesses? Of the 11.5 million, how much of that dollar amount?
Oh, okay. that is a little trickier. I've got a nice long response that doesn't answer that question. I would have to go back and look at estimates, largely because of the 8 or so different services we utilise them differently, and then not all of these proposed service providers are being utilised. So if you look at, say, the combo, what's A to K? 11 different types of wet hire services we're utilising here.
Yes.
Not all 24 are on there. I would have to look. I know Combo makes up about 40 or 50% of the expenditure. I would then have to look at, of those, were all 3 that we're proposing, or sorry, all 16, how many of those 16 were local? It's very
Okay. So,
complex answer, I guess. I can talk about the suppliers and how many are local, how many made it across from the previous to the new and things like
yes, succinctly, yes, please.
that. So currently there are 20 suppliers, incumbent suppliers on the existing arrangement, which has been in place for 5.5 years now. We did come to Council in June for an emergency extension of this for 6 months, so that we could take a more strategic approach to the market. And as previously noted, Charles Kendall Australia supported us in delivery of this tender as a very complex, as I'm hinting at, approach, and there's a very complex matrix associated with the recommendation. Of the 20 incumbent suppliers, 11 incumbent suppliers are not carrying over. However, 6 of those did not tender. This is common with the wet hire. Some businesses close down, new businesses start up. We do have a lot of local and small businesses involved. 24 suppliers on the new arrangement. I have a table for talking about. I'm not sure if we would have to take the closed session if we're going to discuss the individual suppliers.
No, it's...
So of the proposed tenderers, 22 out of the 24 meet our by Ipswich policy approach. That's not to say that they are particularly local businesses. I do have a list which I can supply of the local business addresses of the proposed suppliers, but again, it's a complex mix in that there are some non-local that may just be outside of our local region but plan to spend 50, 60, 70% of their contract value within the council boundaries.
Right. And will you be monitoring that?
Yes. So contract management framework is in final throes and for consideration soon, and this would be one of the primary ones where we would be kicking off under the new framework and having thorough meetings on it.
So based on our previous spend, Mr White, and what we're proposing here, will we be spending more money in Ipswich than we were previously with Ipswich companies or
I take that on notice?
Yep.
I'll take it on notice with the question on where the expenditure will be, that I can give those answers. And I would have to look historically as well at the previous, because I will say that's a gap that we are looking to remediate, is our ability to track spending with regards to local expenditure. So we're making system changes to better support us in doing that, but they will take a couple of months for us to get into place.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr White? No, thank you, Mr White.
Thank you.
One question just for you, CEO. Noting the 24 suppliers, are there any issues or concerns for those suppliers that we should be aware of? Or
I'm not aware of any concerns that have been raised about these planned hire suppliers. One of the reasons why Mr White's been conclusive about that is because it is a panel operation. And it depends on who gets the actual pieces of work and the form of the work we require. So, you could project what work people are going to get, but until you actually roll it through a 5-year period, you don't actually know.
okay. So any risks or issues or concerns you'd like to raise with us?
No, look, the provision of wet plant, as you would know due to your family connection, is a contentious issue with lots of complexity, because it is council interacting with often very small business and at the coalface. So it's always a challenge to make sure that we're getting the right plant and equipment at the right time, and getting good value and managing that contract effectively. So there is always a challenge, not so much in the initial procurement, but actually in managing effectively your planned hire.
Any other questions? No, I'll open it for discussion. There being no discussion, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous.
Mayor,
Oh, yes.
May I move for a 5-minute adjournment?
That's okay. So we'll vote for an adjournment. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Then we'll come back here at 10 o'clock. Thank you.
9:50.
Thank you very much. We've now come back from an adjournment, and we're on to item number 9, the cemetery deed amendment deed, which is that the CEO be authorised under the Local Government Act to administer the contract variations to the cemetery services deed, to execute the attached amendment deed to any other acts necessary to implement council's decision. May I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor Ireland, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Kunzelman. Do we have any questions we'd like to ask of council officers? I'm getting a nod from Councillor Fichtner and Councillor Ireland. May I have the relevant council officer, please? I'll get you to please state your name and your position.
Alicia Connaughton, Manager Compliance.
Thanks, Ms Connaughton. Councillor
Okay.
Councillor Ireland?
Good morning. I just would like to know how much capacity is left at Worrell Park.
I guess it's subjective because at the moment it goes on burial rates, but from what I can ascertain at the moment, I guess the estimate is 40 to 60 years. But with burial rates going down and cremations rising, that could extend out as time goes on.
Okay, and is the tea trees burial area, is it still being used or is it sort of slowed down?
I'd have to take that on notice, Councillor. I'm not sure.
All right, thank you. Also, do you look after the Ipswich Cemetery?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I'm just wondering what we decided to do with the crypt. We dug it out and did a whole lot of work on it, and we covered it up again. Are we ever going to do anything with it, or put a glass top on it or anything?
I believe there's still some work to be done, but I've only taken over the portfolio like in October, so I'm looking at it. Like I know that there's still a little bit of work to get done, but I need to look into that. So can that be on notice as well, please?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Just
Councillor
through the
Hickman,
chair. Councillor Aaron raises an interesting question. So Ipswich Cemetery, is the official name for that Ipswich Cemetery?
Ipswich General Cemetery.
So just in the report, it says that we have a contract with Norwood for the management of council's 5 cemeteries, and Ipswich General Cemetery is not listed in that. So we have more than 5 cemeteries that we manage outside of. Or these are the 5 that Norwood have the contract over, and then there is a separate management of other cemeteries.
So Ipswich General Cemetery essentially is a memorial cemetery, so it has very few burials, so we manage the maintenance of it, but if there is a burial, which is rare these days, then Norwood would manage that.
And that's captured in the contract with Norwood, I guess. Is that capture the question?
The exact arrangement, I'd have to have a look at the contract, so I have to take that on notice.
And I guess a second question would be, are there any other cemeteries or are there any other cemeteries that we manage that aren't on this list?
No.
Other than the Ipswich General Cemetery?
Yes.
I guess, and you might not know the answer to this, have we been either gifted or have we resumed or assumed responsibility for any other cemeteries, say, in the past 10 to 20 years? Is that something that comes onto the book, and maybe the CEO can help me answer this question? For instance, if a trust no longer exists that was previously managing a cemetery, would it be council's responsibility to take that onto their books and incorporate it into an agreement like this to take care of the grounds?
It is unlikely. In my experience, over time, some councils have made decisions to do that on request, but you would have to look at the specific history of that particular trust. I'm not aware of the details, but it has happened in the past where a trust has managed a cemetery, and at some point in time, the council has taken responsibility of that because the trust can't continue to maintain it, and it's been in the interests of the general community that that area is maintained.
Thank you.
But that is has been, when that has happened, that's been a decision of the council at the time and in consideration of the local circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Just through the me, a question on notice. There is a cemetery on Sipples Road at Grantchester. I'm just wondering if you can tell me, is it under trust and has it currently got a current trustee on it? It's a question on notice. If you
Oh,
can
on
let me
notice, yeah, I'm
know,
not aware.
please.
Thank you.
Any other
Yes.
questions? Yes.
Just
Councillor.
if I just comment on that trusteeship, I believe up until 1978, there were a number of individual trustees who managed who were the trustees of the Ipswich General Cemetery, and I think Worrell Park as well, even though it was outside the city of Ipswich at that point. And then the state government appointed the Ipswich City Council in 1978 as the trustee of the two cemeteries. So it's still a trust cemetery, but you know, the trustee is the corporation. I just got two queries on the report, please. On page 2, about halfway down in the 5th paragraph, it says, whilst it raises the question to whether there was ever a signed document, both council and Norwood have continued operations based on the assumption the amendment deed has been properly executed and the 5% fee was acceptable. Then over on page 3, under conclusion, it states it's not known why the amendment deed was not signed in 2013. They seem to be two inconsistent statements in the report.
I guess the agreement, or the 5%, the amendment was acted on under the assumption that it was signed.
Yes.
And in the absence of any records, we don't know why it wasn't signed. Was it an oversight? Was the document lost? We don't know.
So it could have been signed and lost.
We just don't know.
No, but well, it was either never signed or it was signed. That's right. Well, it's got to be right.
Yes.
Yeah. And if it was signed, we can't find it.
That's correct.
Any other questions, Ms. Connaughton? Thank you very much. So I think Councillor Taylor, you've got some of the questions I was going to ask the CEO, that obviously it was at 15%. Something happened, there's no records, and it changed to 5%, and it's been at that way for, I think, a number of years, CEO?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
What's your advice in this situation?
there's a recommendation from officers. It appears that both parties have been acting on the basis that that negotiation was done fairly and appropriately. I'd concur with the recommendation of the staff that we accept the practice.
I guess, does that mean that the trust currently has, $166,000 in it? Will that be enough to maintain the cemeteries afterwards?
No. Councils that operate cemeteries, and even when they don't operate cemeteries, end up maintaining them into the future, and often you'll find after 100 or 150 years they turn into rest parks and move from being pure cemeteries to places of quiet reflection that are passive parks. And the
Just
councils
through the chair
maintain.
and to the CEO, you said that when council does and potentially doesn't own, council is still maintaining these cemeteries.
I'm not saying this council, but I'm just saying generally across the country, there may well be cemeteries that were operated by trust, or they were small cemeteries, and council. You often have small country cemeteries that might have a dozen graves in. The council takes some form of responsibility, gets a volunteer group that may manage it, but the council still has some involvement in it. That's comparatively common. Situations where the trust can't manage it, and as Councillor Tully said, the state either passes a responsibility to the council takes it over. Ultimately, there's an expectation by the community that cemeteries are kept in an appropriate manner given their former use, in respect for the former residents of the city that are buried there.
Councillor Ficken?
And just follow-up question, if we do have community members asking us as councillors, or if they contact council directly and they have concerns about the maintenance of a particular site, would it be worth council in those instances writing to the trusts to ask them what their current arrangements are, and if they're unable to fulfil the maintenance of it, would that then come back to council for a decision to say, would we be happy to take the maintenance of that onto our books and make sure that everything's okay?
Well, you'd have to have a look at the terms and conditions of the trust deed, what the history is, etc. I think everything is on a case-by-case basis. And these things come with costs, and obviously it's to do with size and what the conditions in terms of maintenance are. So everyone is different, and depends on the location, the history on each matter. But as I said, it's not uncommon over time for councils to take over some form of care and control of historical cemeteries.
And just a final question with regards to the state government stepping in occasionally. I'm not sure, I'm not aware, maybe you are and maybe you're not. Does the state government have guidelines as to how the grounds of a cemetery should be kept?
No. As I said, there's custom and practice, and often what I mentioned is it's often in very, very old cemeteries and smaller ones that they are converted to a rest park. Often, if the headstones have fallen over, they're then put in a corner of the park, and it's often then grassed, and it's placed as it's a quiet area of quiet contemplation. I've had ones that have been like a rose garden planted in those spaces, etc., etc. But they're very much case by case. They're very much down to the history and the legality and the certain circumstances.
Thank you for your insights.
Thank you. And see, I know that one, obviously council don't manage all cemeteries, including the one in Goodna. Is that correct? It's been maintained and looked after by a trust?
Well, it's my understanding it's not under our control.
It's not an Ipswich City Council controlled cemetery. Okay. Any other discussion? No. In that case, I put this one to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 10, which is the withdrawal of planning scheme major amendment package. This is quite a lengthy one. The recommendation is that Council resolve to withdraw a planning scheme major amendment package 2 of 2018, which proposes amendments to Part 14 of the Springfield Structure Plan of the Ipswich Planning Scheme due to the introduction of the Forest Wind Farm Development Act of 2020 and associated Planning Act 2016 amendments. May I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor Kunzelman. A seconder? Thank you, Councillor Dwanick. Thank you. May I have the relevant council officer, please? Please state your name and title, please.
Good morning. Danielle Owen, Manager City Design.
Thank you. In layman's terms, what are you asking this council to
Certainly.
approve?
There was a Supreme Court decision in a case which is Springfield Land Corp, Pty Ltd versus Cherish Enterprises. We proposed initially an amendment planning scheme amendment package to amend the Springfield Structure Plan in recognition of essentially some of the outcomes of the decision in that case. That was approved by the interim administrator back in 2018. So that amendment package has been and still is sitting with the state government. The state government also, in response to the outcomes of the decision in the Supreme Court case, determined to pass the Forest Wind Farm Development Act 2020, as the Mayor referred. That was assented to on the 20th of August. So essentially it amended the Planning Act, and the Planning Act is the legislation that our planning scheme needs to be prepared under, and amendments to the planning scheme aligned with, essentially. So effectively what has happened is the amendments that the state government has assented to in that changes to the Planning Act really override the need for the original changes that we had proposed and Council had approved in that amendment package. So in essence, I guess with the passage of time since we first proposed the amendment package, the state has made and amendments to the Act have now come into force. So we have an amendment package that really is no longer required or technically able to be made because amendments to the Act have been made.
So under the original scheme,
Yes, yes.
Cherish would have to come to Springfield City Group for any amendments or changes, is that correct?
The amendments were that we were removing requirements that local area plans had to be prepared by Springfield City Group and instead required Council to consult with Springfield City Group when any other parties submitted a local area plan. There's multifaceted.
What was the original, I guess not the amendment, but what was the original agreement or original plan?
I believe...
That Cherish would have to go to Springfield?
I believe that's the case,
Right.
yes, to seek their approval.
Right. And then went to the Supreme Court to amend that?
Yes, and essentially there was more than that in the judgment, but without going into the full judgment, now applications to make or amend precinct plans may be approved by third parties subject to requirements that Springfield City Group's views must be sought and considered. So it's a change in arrangement.
That's what the arrangements under the Supreme Court?
This is now under the new legislation that has come into place.
If I can just go step
Yep,
by step,
sure.
we went to what we had originally. Then the Supreme Court said...
I'd have to go into that part of it. I'm just looking at what the changes were under the Planning Act.
Was there a difference between the Supreme Court ruling and the legislative changes?
Again, I'd have to take that on notice and brief you on both, yes. Yep.
Okay.
So there's our amendments.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
certainly, that'd be great.
I ask Mr Davey to come forward, please.
Excellent, thanks, we'll do a slot. Thank you.
Thank you. Just say your name and your title.
Good morning, Brett Davey, Manager Development Planning. So the original drafting of the structure plan had triggers for certain applications to require agreement from Springfield City Group. The Cherish case contested that matter, and the courts found that those certain applications may not have required agreement from Springfield City Group. We propose the amendments to the planning scheme to address the determination of the court judgment. As Daniel explained, it has been sitting in abeyance whilst other actions occurred, including legislation change. The legislation change has, in a way, reaffirmed the original provisions. So it's kind of gone back to the original provisions, in some sense, undone some of the determinations from the court.
Okay.
So it's very clear on what applications require comment from Springfield City Group, and it's implemented a more stringent process for that to happen and timeframes.
Okay. So what this motion, what these recommendations, the report is asking is that we had an original situation, went to court, and there was a ruling, but then there's state government legislation that's come over, which overrides the Supreme Court.
Yep.
Is that correct? So we need to adjust our planning or how we do things to accords with the law.
There's really two ways of undertaking changes to a planning regime. It's either the council proposes those changes through the state and the state then approve that change, and then we go through a regular process, or in this case they've taken it through a legislation process, and so they've implemented legislation to have the same effect. So in essence, there has been an amendment undertaken. It's not the one that we asked for, but it is an amendment, and there is no point in trying to pursue the current amendment given what's been changed through legislation.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr Davey. So any other questions of Mr Davey? So I think...
Yes,
Mr Davey?
please.
Councillor Tully?
On page 93, as noted by us, the second page of the report, down the bottom it goes through the process under the legislation, It says the Springfield City Group must give a statement to the Ipswich City Council in response to any plan applications not made by SCG. Do you know, is there a time frame in which they're obliged to do that?
Yes, I think it's 10 business days, but I am just going off memory there, Councillor, so I can verify that for you. We are currently working through the types of protocols that we'll have to implement internally to manage that process, as well as the interactions with Springfield City Group on that front.
Was there any consultation through you, Mayor, with the council about this legislation prior to it being introduced?
There was some consultation at an officer level prior to the finalisation, but I don't believe we got asked for comments on the final version of the legislation until it was before Parliamentary Committee, and then we were able to make submissions, and esteemed colleague Mr Tabulo appeared as part of that process to represent our views on the formal submission through that process.
Just finally, and this is a typo, I think, on the top of page 2 of the report. It says, with the ascension of the Forest Wind Farm Development Act 2012, I think it means it should be the assent.
Yeah, it probably should be, yep. We can have that corrected.
It was probably a...
Same with the subject title, it said Pack 8 instead of package.
Yep.
Yeah, that could be changed, please.
We can work with our committee branch and get those fixed.
Yep. Are there any questions of Mr Davey? Thank you, Mr Davey. I now open up for discussion. Yes, Councillor Tory.
Mayor, I'm concerned, I'll be supportive of the motion because when you've been gazumped by state legislation, there's not much alternative. Even the Pineapple Man in Rockhampton's been made aware of that this week. But I think it's unfortunate that the state government moved to overturn a Supreme Court decision. The highest court in our jurisdiction made a determination which has been overturned by legislation with very little consultation. Even the name of the legislation concerns me. If you look at the Forest Wind Farm Development Act of 2020, as our report says that it was proposed to facilitate proposed major renewable energy projects within Tulare, Tuan and Nerdy state forests between Gympie and Maryborough. This other bit in relation to Springfield and the structure plan seems to have been tacked on without a lot of fanfare, without a lot of community consultation, in a bid to restore Springfield Cities Group powerful position which they had and had been overturned by the Supreme Court. It certainly concerns me. Even the name of the legislation wouldn't induce any ordinary member of the public, let alone councillors or people in our local community, to be aware that there was something so significant being contained in legislation referring to a forest wind farm development. I think it behoves the state of any political government, of any political persuasion, to ensure that legislation carries at least a basic meaning about the extent of the particular legislation. As I said, it restores the situation prior to the Supreme Court ruling. My view was that the Supreme Court ruling was, and it's quite an extensive and lengthy judgment. It was very fair, it was very reasonable. Now at the stroke of a pen by the Governor of Queensland, the new legislation's come in, and people would be very, very surprised that Springfield City Group has been able to maintain what is often said to be the fourth level of government in Queensland.
Well said, Councillor Tully.
Yeah.
I think you summed things up very well. But I guess it's the state, it's the Act, so that we're proceeding with. Any other discussion? Those in favour of this recommendation, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Move on to item 11, the Court Action Status Report. May I ask for a mover? Thank you, Councillor Ireland. A seconder? Thank you, Councillor Fechner. Do we wish to ask any questions? I certainly would like to ask a question of the relevant council officer.
Yeah, I've got one.
Yes.
Morning again, Brett Davey, Manager Development Planning.
Councillor Tully.
Yes, it's just that one that's been there for a while, and I think there was going to be what looked like, I'm just trying to pick it up, at Ascot Street, at Goodna. There was an action at the end of October. Sorry, I just can't, oh yes, 45 Ascot Street. It said it was as listed for review on the 26th of October. Could you advise, please, what the current position is?
On that Ascot Street matter, as the review set down a method of essentially finalising the matter to either progress it to a trial or to enter into a consent order, and so there's with that prejudice conversations going on at present in that space.
And how long is that, would you estimate that may go on for?
I think the matter will come to a head in the next couple of weeks.
By resolution?
Yeah, I think the matter will be resolved in the next couple of weeks. Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Dave, I note that the land track cleanaway and the Amaya pulled together, but with
Yes.
the land track, do you mind giving us an update on where that's at?
Land track specifically.
And the other
Yeah,
two?
yeah. With that report provides an overview of some movements to almost combine those three matters, and so it's pretty much made them come to the same point. So some of them are in a rush, and some of them are being held back in a process of preparing all of the specialist reports, and some of those specialist reports are using combined data. So the outcome of the recent determinations of the court is that those three matters are to be essentially prepared in awareness of each other. Certain technical information is to be common. Sharing of information is also to be common. And there will be a combination of reports, both general on the planning principles and other principles, and then the specifics and science of each site. And they've currently been set down for hearing of between 6 and 8 weeks. So all three of them are essentially doing the same thing now, and that is preparing the technical reports, whether that be individual or common, to get to a May, June hearing, which isn't in court dates. That's not that far away. Yeah.
So you said 6 to 8 weeks, there's a hearing.
Yes.
So obviously we're looking at December, January.
No, look, you'll probably, if it, the December, January could be, as in January 2022, that could be the outcome, but it depends on how long it takes for the judge to deliberate. So the other advantage, I suppose, of this process is that there will be a single judge seeing all three matters, so that's a consistent approach. But it's really up to the judge, once they've finished the hearing, how quickly they can make their judgment.
What's the next step in this process?
Us preparing for trial, and that's essentially preparing all of the specialist materials that's necessary. So we've got our team working on that, as do the other parties.
Okay. And when will that be on?
The trial is planned for May, June, July at this point in time. So they've set down 6 weeks with an additional buffer of an additional 2 weeks. So yeah.
2021?
No, for 2021, yeah. Yeah. So we'll be busily working for the balance of this year and early next year to get in the best position we can. Now there is, a chance that those timeframes will creep, but we will do our best to be a model litigant so that doesn't happen.
Thank you, Mr. Davey. Any other questions? No. Thank you, Mr. Davey. In opening up for discussion, I just think obviously we had an agreement by the previous Environment Minister to be part of a joint task force on waste, and obviously there's been a cabinet reshuffle, as normally happens after an election, so we'll make that approach to the new Environment Minister to see if she will commit to having that joint task force working with us on waste and knowing the timelines we have for those trials. Is there any other discussion? No? Okay. Those in favour of receiving this report and noting the context, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous. Thank you. We now go on to item 12, which is the exercise of delegation report. Again, it's a recommendation that the report be received and contents noted. May I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. I have a seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Kunzelmann. Do you have any questions of council officers in this delegations report? No? I'll open up for discussion. There being no discussion, I'll move it to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you. We go to our last report, which is a late report, which is on the Infrastructure Environment Department Capital Portfolio Financial Performance Report for September. May I have a mover for that? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Kunzelmann. The recommendation is that the monthly financial performance report on the Infrastructure and Environment Department's capital portfolio budget for 2020-2021 be received and the contents noted. Does anyone like to ask any questions of the relevant council officer? May I ask for the relevant council officer, please? I'd like to state your name and your position.
Sure. Good morning, Mayor and Councillors. Jeff Keach, Chief Financial Officer. Thought we'd come down with the GM of IND just in case a question related to either of us.
Thank you. Let's look at some of these, some of the projects here, and I know there's some projects such as the Sutton Park skate park.
Yes.
We received state government funding for that.
Yes.
But how is that tracked? Because I see that that grant money is not allocated here, so it looks as though it's overspent by 531%. So how is it addressed? I couldn't find it any notes or anything like that. How do we track the grants?
Yep, sure. There's two elements here, right? There's the grant revenue, which comes in, and this is reporting expenditure, not revenue. With relation to Sutton Park, originally when the budget was adopted, we only had a small component allocated for Sutton Park, so that's why it's looking adverse at this point in time, because we've brought forward the expenditure from future years in accordance with the grant conditions. So the plan will be, there's a reference in the report to doing some budget amendments. So we're in the process at the moment, and it's going to talk to ELT on Monday about amending the budget, which effectively then will either reallocate within the existing portfolio. If we think the spend is still going to be within the 86 million, we'll reallocate within that portfolio and allocate directly the funds to cover that. And that would eliminate that variance in terms of Sutton Park looking as though it's over budget at this point in time. So that process is underway at the moment, and we'll bring that to Council for review and recommendation.
Sure. I see in the risk area, thank you very much for a good report and to highlight this.
Yep.
And obviously we've talked about that there's a forecast of substantial increases in monthly expenditure to enable the delivery on the capital program, because based on the full budget that there is going to be significant expenditure required from January and June and delivery.
Yes.
May I get an update on how the organisation is going to be doing that?
Yep, sure. Do you want to respond to that?
Mayor and Councillors, Charlie Dill, General Manager, Infrastructure and Environment. When we adopted the budget, we had our preliminary forecast of works to be delivered, and that's based on sort of default durations for certain types of projects, and that's how we build our schedule. With our schedule and our preliminary estimates that we have for those projects, we provide a cash flow. As we develop detailed design and better understand the logic of delivery and sequencing of delivery, we can provide more accuracy around when and how those projects are delivered. So what happens is, rather than a flat line or close to flat line of delivery and cash flow, we start seeing a more of an S curve being developed, where we're doing a lot of design, low expense, but still a lot of work, and construction happening in the latter half of the financial year. So that is primarily what you're seeing, is a shift in that expenditure towards the latter half of the financial year. That is somewhat a natural life cycle of a delivery year. However, it's probably a little bit more extreme than what we'd like to see, and hence it's highlighted as a risk. Some of the factors around that are due to external influences, i.e. service utility providers, in them being able to provide their designs to us, their quotations to us, and then a letter of acceptance for them to undertake the work. So it's a third party, it's a bit out of our control. And in addition to that, we have been maturing, the organisation has been maturing in the procurement space and resourcing up and establishing systems and getting all the momentum behind that. So there's been a little bit of impact behind some contracts being let in accordance with the original program. Currently, the risk is being managed because we are monitoring those on a fortnightly basis. We are working with procurement to look at procurement strategies where the contracts move from a traditional design then construct to a design and construct, or whether more packages get lumped up into the one package. So we're looking at mitigation strategies through our procurement practice.
Are you in a position, Mr Dill, to state whether you'll be able to deliver on the full capital works program for this financial year?
So the forecast is indicating that we will get very close to the original budgeted amount of delivery. Naturally, in terms of the scope of work, naturally there can be some financial shifts up and down throughout the year, and we're actually seeing some savings or some programs that don't have or haven't required projects to be allocated to them, some emergent works or contingent type programs. So there's underspends there because there are no required works.
Is there any other questions? No, thank you very much, Jill. Thank you, CFO. So, in your opinion, are there any issues or concerns that we should have over the tracking of the first quarter of this capital works program?
I would say that there is risk in delivery. Having said that, it may mean that the delivery of your 1 year program, you may well have a lump towards the middle of the year that may stretch out into the. Mr. Dill is confident, but my experience has been project managers are often confident, and things happen that may delay it. So at this stage, our planning says that we can do it. Some things may happen that push that back a little. It doesn't mean that the works won't be done. What it may mean is they're not done by the 30th of June. But at this stage, our planning suggests it will, but there is risk.
And internally, the organisation, how are you managing that schedule and risk?
It's really about gearing up capability. One of the significant issues, of course, is the change to centralised procurement, which was done for very good reasons and has taken some time to begin to get to speed, but that's now fully staffed with capable people, and we're confident that will be able to start to really contribute to that process. It's about getting designs, and as Mr. Dill said, it's also getting third parties, and when we talk about utility providers, they can be difficult and they can do things at their own agenda. So that's gas, power, water, telco. If they're not going to move their asset, anything that's brownfields, if they're not going to do that until 2 months later than we want them to, there's nothing we can do. We have to wait for those people, and that obviously then delays the whole project. So it is fraught. What I can say is we will get better at this. Yep. And this organisation probably traditionally hasn't been as good, and most of local government hasn't been traditionally as good at delivering their capital programs to time, as outlined, and it takes some time to gear yourself up to get to that level.
And does the organisation have the policy mechanisms in place to deliver on this?
Look, I think we do. There is always going to be challenges that come from changing priorities, from natural disasters, from, as I said, from third parties that can impact these things. But I think we are developing the capability to be able to reliably deliver what we're talking about, which is about $100 million ongoing year-on-year capital program.
That's okay. Thank you. Open up for discussion.
Just through you, Mayor.
Councillor Finger.
I want to thank the officers for this report on behalf of council, but also the community. I think the contextualisation of the data really highlights the fact that nobody here has a crystal ball and can see into the future, and some of those really volatile moments in project timelines are captured here, like relocations, and I think that it's really important for us to have access to this contextualisation of the data so that we can see that this is a moving beast and that we're not always going to get it right. But the commitment today from Mr. Dill, the CFO, and our CEO that they're committed to delivering, this CapEx budget of $100 million year on year. I think that's a wonderful thing for our city. So I just want to say thank you for this report, for the contextualisation of the data and for that commitment and that reassurance to us today that we're prepared to make sure that we are moving forward on these projects and getting better at it. Then that's a wonderful thing for all of us.
Thank you, Councillor Fickner. If there's no other discussion, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you. That's the last item, so I'll now close the meeting at 10:40. Thank you very much.